The worst attack in London since World War II.
Just carnage. Unbelievable.
At the height of the morning rush hour, a series of bombs killed dozens and injure hundreds. Tonight, exclusive information about the bombs that did not go off and the crucial evidence found in the rubble. Here at home, high alert. The government raises the threat level for mass transit. Could such bombings happen here? The results of an ABC News investigation. This is a special World News Tonight. Terror in London.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. Reporting tonight, Charles Gibson.
Good evening. It has happened again. The world jolted by the horror of terrorism. It began as a typical morning commute in London, and then the bombs started going off. Explosions at 3 separate subway stations tore through trains and ripped apart a double-decker bus like it was a tin can. When it was over, at least 38 people were dead and 700 injured, one of the world's great cities paralyzed. It happened as the leaders of the world's industrial nations, including President Bush, were gathered 300 miles to the north in Scotland. The agenda for their meeting shifted instantly, perhaps part of what the terrorists intended. We have a full team reporting on this tonight, including reports on what British authorities believe could be a major break in the case, and on the increased terror alert here in the U.S. We're going to start with ABC's David Wright in London.
Carnage and chaos in the morning rush hour.
Sorry, we've got a major incident here. Sorry, can we move off the road, please? Move to the side, please.
When trains and buses are always packed.
My sister, she was hurt, and she's on the tube somewhere, and she's at Russell Square, but no one's really telling us anything.
The 4 explosions all hit in less than an hour.
People screaming and wailing, people are dying in here, help us, help us.
8:51, the first bomb exploded on the subway between Aldgate and Liverpool stations in the heart of London's financial district. At least 90 people injured there, 7 confirmed dead. 5 minutes later, another bomb between King's Cross and Russell Square, not far from the British Museum. 21 confirmed deaths there. This woman had never ridden the subway before.
A ball of fire came in, and then just everyone started shouting on the carriage that blew up, and there was this awful screaming of people like just help, 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 and it's just indescribable.
These images were recorded on a cell phone by one of the passengers trapped on a train. Eventually, they all had to hike through dark tunnels to safety.
You couldn't see past your nose. It was the smoke was so intense. But on the tracks, it was okay. Very difficult to breathe.
And everyone, just kind of long story short, thought they were going to die. People started saying prayers.
It was mayhem, and then the driver came out of the carriage, and which was quite scary because he shone a red light, and we all thought it was, I thought I was dead.
At 9:15, a third explosion at Edgware Road, a largely Muslim neighborhood. This time, the blast was so powerful, it tore through the subway wall and damaged 2 other trains on adjacent tracks. 7 more people killed. At 9:46, the entire subway system was shut down. 1 minute later,
it was the loudest boom ever. It literally sounded like 2 trains colliding.
A double-decker bus exploded in Tavistock Square. The top sheared right off. The immediate aftermath caught again by a cell phone camera.
Blood everywhere and dead people. One lady just walking away, just crying in shock, with the person holding her.
It's not clear how many people were killed in that attack. The blast spattered blood and pockmarked buildings around it, including the British Medical Association, which was pressed into service as an emergency triage center. Before noon, all of London's hospitals were full. At the G8 summit in Scotland, flags were lowered to half-staff, and a visibly shaken Tony Blair hurried home to London.
The terrorists will not succeed.
But today they did succeed in shaking this city's nerves and bringing terror to its doorstep. And this is where it all began just before 9 o'clock this morning. But tonight, the streets of London are dead quiet, and Aldgate Station behind me is now a crime scene. Officials are hoping that tomorrow things will begin to return to normal, but many may keep their distance. Charlie?
David Wright, who has been reporting all day from London. The immediate questions today were, who did this and how did they do it? Finding out the how can go a long way to determining the who. And our chief investigative correspondent, Brian Ross, says there have already been some very significant breakthroughs in the investigation. He joins us tonight with exclusive details. Brian?
That's right, Charlie. U.S. authorities tell ABC News that police in London have told them they have recovered key parts of the timing devices that set off the bomb. And there are also reports the police may have discovered 2 unexploded bombs. The reports of the 2 unexploded devices came as police sifted through the wreckage of the bombs that did go off.
Once it's disarmed and you get inside there and you can really find out exactly what this explosive device is, what's the compound.
Authorities now say the 4 bombs that did go off on the upper deck of this bus and in 3 subway trains were all likely set off by timers, not suicide bombers. Authorities say they have recovered remnants of timing devices, suggesting the bombs were planted in packages or bags and left behind.
It's entirely possible that a very small group of individuals was involved. Indeed, one or a couple of individuals could have moved right across the city planting those devices.
The London bombings are similar in many ways, with the coordinated attacks on Spanish trains in Madrid 16 months ago that killed 200 people. The most important piece of evidence in Madrid was the discovery of this backpack in the rubble. Inside was an unexploded bomb, now being carefully examined by London police. A cell phone was wired as the bomb detonator, and it was that phone that led police to the terrorists.
And they were able to find then who had sold it and to whom they had sold it.
London has long been a target and recruitment center for al-Qaeda, and police say they have twice in the last 3 years disrupted plans to attack the London subway system. High on the list of suspects in today's attack is the same man who has been terrorizing Iraq, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. Officials say Zarqawi and Osama bin Laden have talked of expanding Zarqawi's attacks to Europe and the U.S.
The Zarqawi network is apparently recruiting people in the Islamic world and in Western Europe, bringing them to Iraq, finding out who's good and who won't be afraid of fighting, testing them, training them.
The only claim of responsibility came today on an Islamic website posted by a previously unknown group calling itself Qiyat al-Jihad. The site claimed the attacks on London were carried out because of the presence of British troops in Iraq and Afghanistan. But there was no way, Charlie, to confirm the authenticity of the claim or even of the group.
All right, thanks very much. Our chief investigative correspondent, Brian Ross. The State Department says it has reports of 4 Americans injured today, but none killed. 2 of the injured are sisters, Emily and Katie Benton of Knoxville, Tennessee. Not certain how seriously they may have been hurt. These attacks certainly seem tied to the summit of industrialized world leaders going on right now in Scotland. This morning, the cameras were there as British Prime Minister Blair broke the news of the bombings to President Bush and the other leaders. They were supposed to be talking about global warming and poverty. Now, they're also talking about terrorism.
The contrast couldn't be clearer between the intentions and the hearts of those of us who care deeply about human rights and human liberty, and those who kill.
Here at this summit, the world's leaders are striving to combat world poverty and save and improve human life. The perpetrators of today's attacks are intent on destroying human life.
ABC's Terry Moran is traveling with President Bush in Scotland. Terry, it was sobering to see the leaders of the world's powerhouse economic nations standing there visibly shaken today by just a few guys with bombs.
It really was, Charlie. Yesterday, this summit was about rock stars and that ambitious agenda to reduce poverty and global warming. And now a pall has fallen over Glen Eagles. After Tony Blair broke the news to the other leaders, you could see as they sat around that table in their shirt sleeves, just etched in their faces the gravity of this moment. The summit was actually suspended for a time. When they reconvened, according to a U.S. official who was in the room, they all expressed a sense of determination to carry on with that agenda and drew that contrast that you just heard from President Bush and Prime Minister Blair between this hopeful agenda here and the mass murder in London.
ABC's White House correspondent Terry Moran in Scotland. London has had long experience with bombs in World War II with the Irish Republican Army attacks. That is not to diminish today's attack, which the mayor of London called mass murder. But it may account for the fact that Londoners responded today with what was, under the circumstances, remarkable calm. ABC's Jim Sciutto spent the day on the streets of London.
Ladies and gents, we need to clear now Russell Square.
On the streets of downtown London, there was, at the start, deep confusion.
I haven't got a clue. It's chaos.
We don't know what happened, to be honest. We were just in a carriage. There was a big explosion.
Then, as thousands of police and emergency workers sprang into action, much of the chaos turned quickly to a remarkable calm.
But there seems to be an eerie calm in central London. British people have a great resilience.
The emergency response here, immediate and thorough, the police quickly clearing the wounded and the dead. Where the police could not work, Londoners pitched in themselves. The city's trademark double-decker buses, a target just hours before, were ferrying wounded to hospitals. And bystanders carried the injured as well and brought emergency supplies in shopping carts. Sean Barron, an emergency medical worker visiting from New Jersey, volunteered to help at one hotel-turned-hospital.
We set up a triage in the lobby, and then from there we transferred patients who were like walking wounded, not really badly hurt, to like a separate room. And then we focused on the patients who were more injured.
Some of the wounded shrugged off their injuries.
Honestly, this is nothing. I feel worse for the people in there than for me.
On many street corners, there were small comforts, blankets for the wounded, and warm cups of tea for everyone. Within hours of the blast, the buses were running again, and they were filling with passengers.
You just get on with it, don't you? You get blown up, you get blown up.
I don't think it's going to change our life at all. I'm determined that it shouldn't. That's the whole point. If you let it change your life, then you've let these evil, cowardly, despicable people win.
And that was a message heard in many parts of this city today. Jim Sciutto, ABC News, London.
The extraordinary people of London. When we return, here in the U.S., high alert. The government raises the terror threat level on buses and trains. New security to thwart a copycat attack. Testing the vulnerability of America's rail system. How easy is it to put a bomb on a train? An ABC News investigation. And 24 hours in London. A tale of two cities, from Olympic victor to terrorist victim.
This is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. Brought to you by Capital One.
We're going to look now at how U.S. officials are trying to keep what happened in London today from happening here. Even while the Department of Homeland Security said there's no credible evidence of an imminent attack, it still raised its alert level for mass transit, from yellow elevated to orange high. ABC's Lisa Stark joins us from Union Station in our nation's capital. Lisa?
Well, Charlie, 30 million people ride the nation's buses, subways, and trains every day. Today, those transit systems were scrambling to react to the London bombings, and many of them took measures even before the security alert was raised.
Extra security was out in force in cities around the country, from bomb-sniffing dogs in Chicago and Atlanta to armed patrols at subway stations in Washington, D.C. and New York City.
All subway tunnels that cross the river are being monitored 24 hours a day by the NYPD.
The additional security measures all part of the heightened threat level for transit.
We feel that at least in the short term, we should raise the level here because obviously we're concerned about the possibility of a copycat attack.
The task is daunting. The country's transit system is enormous. Too many commuters to operate security checks like those at airports.
There's 2,100 checkpoints at commercial airports in the United States. There are more entrances to the New York City subway than that.
That's why public transit officials are appealing to riders to report anything suspicious.
Our customers are our first line of resource of defense, and we're asking them to be vigilant.
Commuters said they wouldn't be deterred.
It is scary, but you got to go on.
Those goons are not
going to affect me, my freedom.
In Los Angeles and other cities, public transit was not the only concern.
We're also looking at government buildings, at infrastructure targets, at cultural targets, religious targets, symbolic targets, because we don't want to put all our focus in one area.
Despite all the concern, officials went out of their way to reassure the public.
Keep your eyes and ears open. Ride the subways, ride the trains, go to the parks. We will win this war.
But one former counterterrorism official said all this extra security, the increased alert level, will do very little. He said it is at best a temporary fix to the long-term problem of terrorism. Charlie?
Lisa Stark outside Washington's train station. Also in Washington at the British Embassy today, sympathy and support. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice visited and wrote in a book of condolence that, quote, they will not have died in vain. Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld declared solidarity with, quote, our friend and ally Great Britain. And the U.S. Army Band played in front of the embassy. And when we come back, more on whether it could happen here. The disturbing results of a major ABC News investigation. As we said, today's bombings in London are raising new questions about the security to prevent a similar attack in this country. The nation's network of subways, buses, and railroads is large, complex, and during rush hours teeming with people. So how difficult would it be to place a bomb on a train in this nation and not be detected? Last fall, in an ABC News investigation, Pierre Thomas found out.
Today, the Homeland Security Secretary assured commuters the country's public transportation is safe.
We operate from a baseline of preparedness that is much, much stronger than it was prior to 9/11, and frankly stronger than it was prior to Madrid.
But security experts say there are still considerable holes in the system.
We're extremely vulnerable. I believe that it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
Last year, after the Madrid bombings, ABC News attempted to test the vulnerability of the nation's commuter trains using hidden cameras. On 2 commuter trains, we were able to leave a backpack on board, no questions asked. On each train, the backpack was left unattended in plain view. On one, the backpack traveled from suburban Maryland for 45 minutes through 6 stations into Washington, D.C. On the other, a backpack we left on board a train a few miles outside of Washington traveled 2.5 hours, all the way into New York's Penn Station. At the time, Homeland Security officials said the test left them uneasy.
It just confirms your fears that there are vulnerabilities in our systems.
And the system is still vulnerable, according to some terrorism experts.
I would guess that a week from now in the United States, if you got on a train and left your backpack on there and got off the train, no one would notice it.
In the last year, the government says it has expanded bomb detection equipment and expanded police patrols at mass transit systems across the country.
Still, some public transportation officials say the government has not done enough. They point to the $18 billion the U.S. government has given the aviation industry since 9/11, compared to the only $250 million provided to public transit.
What we question is why so little investment has been made in public transit.
Many Americans may be asking the same question tonight. Pierre Thomas, ABC News, Washington.
A couple of other stories to report tonight. Word from Iraq of an execution carried out by al-Qaeda kidnappers. They posted a video of Egypt's top diplomat in Iraq, even as they announced they had killed him. Egypt's President Hosni Mubarak called the kidnappers terrorists who trade on Islam but know no religion. In the Caribbean, Hurricane Dennis has strengthened into a dangerous Category 3 storm with 115-mile-an-hour winds. It may hit the U.S. Gulf Coast as soon as late Sunday. These are pictures of the Dominican Republic last night and today. Dennis is bearing down now on Cuba and may intensify even further. Tourists have been told to evacuate the Florida Keys. We'll have a final note about drama and tragedy when we return. For London, what a difference a day makes. Finally tonight, a tale of 2 days, 2 very different days. Hard to imagine that only yesterday London was on top of the world.
The games of the 30th Olympiad in 2012 are awarded to the city of London.
The city chosen to host the 2012 Olympic Games.
We've done it! London have won it!
These were the headlines this morning. Games on. London 2012. But maybe it was The Guardian that summed it up best. One sweet word, London. In papers throughout the world, this was London. Londoners were reading those papers and looking at those pictures as they boarded trains and buses this morning. The news and the newspapers became outdated in an instant. Londoners killed in a despicable attack, killed in the oldest subway system in the world. For Londoners during World War II, the subway tunnels were a place of refuge, a place where thousands of people could take shelter during the German Blitz, the bombing of London. But today, the bombs were underground. Today was the worst attack on London since World War II. Two very different days, one resilient city. And that is our report on World News Tonight. Later this evening at 10 p.m. Eastern, Diane Sawyer will have a full hour with the latest on the attacks today, the investigation, the survivors, and the impact for the United States. I'm Charles Gibson. For Peter Jennings and for all of us here at ABC News, good night.